Hi there, everybody. My name is Dave Glover, and I'm a cloud developer advocate based in Sydney, Australia. I'd love to say it's sunny and bright here, but it's actually pretty late in the day. Vinod, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. I'm Vinod Korpad. I'm a product manager on the Azure Form Recognizer team, and I'm based in Seattle. And like every other day, it's cloudy and rainy over here.
I can tell you it's been very wet in Australia. Hope everybody's having a great build. This session here, hopefully you've tuned in for the right session. This is a Learn Live session, and the session or the content for this is going to be around extracting data from forms with Form Recognizer. So that's kind of what the session's about. Now, first of all, I'd just kind of like to thank, we've got Flo on board, who's our producer. So we will maybe potentially call out to him a couple of times. Now we've got some moderators there. I think we've got about 5 moderators. This is a live session, so do feel free to ask questions. The moderators will potentially answer them, or they may get fed through, and Vinod and myself will look to answer those as well. Now, look, we're going to go at a fairly steady pace. Now, we're going to go through the Learn module, but my advice is probably just kind of follow along with us. The session is going to be recorded, and then kind of go back and look at this later on. So if you miss anything, you can always go back and look at the recording. Now, there will potentially be, depending on time, there will also be an audience participation at the very end. We do have a knowledge check as well, and that very much depends on how we do with time with the knowledge check. Alrighty, so that's kind of the introduction. Now, so the session that we're going to be looking at, or so the Learn module that we're going to be looking at, is this one called Extract Data from Forms with Form Recognizer. Now, there's a link up the top, or there's a QR code, and feel free to bring that website up on your screen and potentially follow along with us as well. But I said maybe kind of emphasize keeping attention on us more than going through the module. Okay, so in terms of learning objectives, so we've got something around identifying how Form Recognizer, the layout services, we're going to talk about pre-built models and also custom services and how you can kind of integrate that into your business processes. We're going to be looking at something called optical character recognition and the capabilities, and we're going to look at some of the SDKs, and we're also going to look at the REST APIs in which you can go and kind of integrate your business processes in with Form Recognizer. And the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to be looking at developing and testing custom models using supervised training. And that's going to be a combination of something called Form Recognizer Studio, and we're also going to fire up a bit of Python code. Now, actually, on that note, we actually have got a couple of demos. So we are going to go through some slides, not many slides, and jump into the module, and then we're going to show you a couple of demos. So fear not, it's not going to be slides and PowerPoint the whole way through. As I kind of mentioned before, this is a live session, so do feel free to ask questions. Vinod is here. He's part of that product group. I'm putting you on the spot there, Vinod. And so throw your trickiest questions at us, and we will do our utmost to answer us. There you go. I'm setting us up for fantastic success, maybe, hopefully.
I guess. All right. The baton has been thrown, I guess.
It has indeed. Okay, so what I suggest you do now is take a quick screenshot of this slide. This slide has got pretty much all the resources that we are going to be using for this session. So there is a link there off to MS Learn, and you'll see it's a pretty straightforward naming convention. So aka.ms, Form Recognizer, Learn, we've got Docs, Applied AI, and there's a Recognizer demo. Now, actually, on that note, I'm going to ask Vinod a question, because we have cognitive services and we have Applied AI. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Applied AI and kind of how that fits into the overall kind of service offerings.
Yeah, that's a great question, Dave. I think as you think about Form Recognizer today, we're an Applied AI service. And essentially there's three layers to the AI stack within Microsoft, right? So there's at the bottom of the stack, there's Azure ML, which is build your own sort of model. You're working with your data, you're training your own models, you're building your own models, you're building your own ML and AI solutions. The next step up, if you want to go in the abstraction layer, is cognitive services. And cognitive services is essentially pre-built models where you are essentially interacting with those models in a request response model, right? So you send in a request with your data, you get a response back with the model that's analyzed your data and your document or your image or the text or language, depending on which cognitive service you call, and you get the response back. Applied AI takes that level of abstraction one step higher. And what we do is essentially we build capabilities built on top of these cognitive services, like computer vision or OCR, for example. And then we have Form Recognizer as an applied AI service that lives on top of OCR. And Form Recognizer essentially solves a business problem. So it is intended to say, this is the solution that targets a specific problem that most customers have, and that's essentially the applied AI services, right? So it's like you take the AI that you've built as part of cognitive service and apply it to solving a business problem.
Okay, cool. That's great. Thank you. Because I must admit, if I wasn't 100% clear, I'm sure lots of people aren't as well. So that's great, just to cover that off. So thanks for that. Okay, so what we're going to talk a bit about now is kind of introduction. Now, if you think about, if you've been in the IT industry as maybe as long as I have, or as maybe all have, I know the dream was that we would live in this paperless world and everything would be online, we'd fill in forms, and we would have mobile applications and all those types of things. But we all know that the reality is very different. Sure, that's dealing with a lot of things. We deal a lot of things online, but you start to think about just how many forms, despite everything being online, how many paper forms we end up filling in. These could be like insurance claims, or they could be things like we're in the middle of a pandemic. I filled in more COVID forms, consent forms, than I think I've done in a long time for signing up for getting jabs and things like that. We have tradespeople come into the house, and invariably they want us to sign some sort of work order. It's invariably a bit of paper. So despite everything being online, there's a hang of a lot of things that are still very much around kind of paper-based. And I know, Vinod, we both do expenses and things like that. So a couple of things like that. What else? What are the other kinds of things that we would do?
Well, there's a whole host of different things that I typically run into as we talk about, like, customers running documents through Form Recognizer. There's scenarios around like mortgage processing is something that's a pretty common challenge. Like there's a lot of different forms that mortgage processors have to deal with. There's scenarios you mentioned, insurance claims. There's just contract management is another thing that there's a lot of sort of buzz around. Like there's a whole ecosystem of providers that do contract lifecycle management, right? And so essentially they're reading these contracts, extracting the metadata from each of these contracts, and being able to process them. That's a fairly sizable challenge for most organizations today.
Yeah, and I just think about day-to-day work. A lot of us claim expenses and things like that, and services like Form Recognizer can really help with those types of scenarios as well. Kind of building that into an overall and a bigger solution. Now, one of the things we also talked about when we're kind of thinking about this session was the concept of structured data or structured documents and unstructured documents. And I remember thinking, well, heck, what's an unstructured document? Aren't kind of documents structured or semi-structured? So we kind of had a bit of a think about that. And I was thinking, well, if I wasn't that clear on it, then maybe it might be a way in which Vinod could just talk a bit about the types of forms that we can deal with.
Yeah. So if you think about it, when we got started building Form Recognizer to deal with highly structured documents, right? And if you look at the slide on the screen, that's all the stuff that you typically see on the left half of the page, right? So it's documents that have a fairly defined geometric visual structure, and you extract the content that you're looking for based on the location. But as we start dealing with semi-structured documents, where things might move around a little bit, not always fit to the exact same location, but you can, as you look at these documents, you can say that there's an inherent structure in these documents. it gets a little bit more complicated to extract the right fields that you're looking for. And then eventually, when you get into the unstructured world of, like, say, like contracts and documents and legal documents and things like that, that is a completely different world where each lawyer might author a contract differently, different clauses, different ways that these clauses are worded. You're going to find the same text or same semantic content, but it's going to be completely different. It's going to be on page 1 in document 1, page 2 in document 2, and you're going to have to find it depending on how the language is structured and how the contract's written. And so as you go through this, just be aware that there are these challenges as you think about it, from highly structured documents to unstructured documents, and being able to pick out the right values for each of the fields that you're interested in is the challenge as you go from highly structured forms where it's fairly layout based to unstructured documents where it's primarily language and text based.
Okay, cool. And it seems to me, and I'm trying to think if you mentioned this, but we also have forms which might have things have been typed in them, they're really obvious text in them, but we can also have handwriting recognition in these forms, and multilingual forms as well, can't we?
So absolutely. So the OCR engine is essentially trained on over 160 different languages. We do handwriting recognition for a subset of those languages. So handwritten forms, for example, like common languages like say English, as an example, would be you can essentially have a person fill out a form. You can then label those fields, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we do the whole custom demo. But you can absolutely extract handwritten text as well as typewritten text and all the different languages that we support. I think there's last time I checked, there was about 160 different languages that you can use.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember looking at it, I'm thinking this is close to magic.
So, this is close to magic, indeed, yes.
It is close to magic with what can be done. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to change gear a little bit, and we're going to go across to the Learn module. So what I've gone to is we're sitting up on Microsoft Learn, and we're looking at the extract data forms with the form recognizer. Now you'll notice that if you're following along, you'll notice that I've actually jumped to Unit 2. So if you do want to follow along, just if you're scratching your head where we've got to, we are sitting on Unit 2. So Vinit, you're going to talk a bit about, hey, just kind of what is Forms Recognizer, and we'll just talk us way through this initial.
Yeah. So thanks, Dave. So essentially, if you think about what Form Recognizer is, it's built on top of the OCR engine, right? So what we do within Form Recognizer is for the first step in anything that we do is we OCR your documents. We're then working on, we have a number of different ways that we can extract the content that you're looking for. But Form Recognizer, if you think about it, is not just a single model. It's a combination of different things that we're running through your document in order to extract the values that you're looking for. And we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go along. But in general, if you think about the core value proposition of Form Recognizer, we start with an input document, which is a PDF document, run that through the OCR engine, and run that through a number of different extraction sort of models, and generate the output that you're looking for. That is typically a JSON output that contains both the fields as well as all the other elements that we were able to extract, including structure and things like that. So Form Recognizer is, when we started off, we were highly structured, but we've now started to work with more unstructured documents as well. And so you'll see some of that as we sort of go through the rest of the Learn module as well.
Okay, that's cool. So yeah, the emphasis here, and the beauty of this is you do end up getting very structured data you can start dealing with. And again, as you see this going through, you'll see this is really kind of quite magical. Now, in terms of the kind of major components, we've got something called the document analysis models, and they take in different types of forms. So we've got things like JPEGs, we've got PNGs, PDFs. Now, when we take in PDFs, we're not actually cracking open that PDF document. We're kind of scanning that document or looking at it. But we can take TIFF files, and as I said, we kind of return back JSON. Now, we've also got pre-built models, and this is where the magic starts to happen. So there are certain types of forms that really are pretty prevalent in our day-to-day. So if you're in the US, no doubt you are familiar with W2 forms, which I think I've been reliably informed are the bane of everyone's life. So not living in America, I don't have to deal with those quite so much. But obviously invoices, we're all having to deal with invoices, receipts, IDs. So in the US, we've got driver's license. For international, we've got international passports, some models for those. So really kind of useful things, and business cards. Though maybe we don't swap as many business cards as we did in the past, we still kind of do a fair number of them. Now, we also have the ability to go and build custom models. So it's all very well. You think, well, Microsoft, and what we've done is we've taken literally thousands of documents of a certain class, and then we have trained AI, machine learning models behind these. And it's those models that you can go and use directly. Or you can go and build custom models. And then effectively what you're doing is you're taking the work that we've done around building these machine learning models and creating custom models, which are maybe super specific to your business. So as I said, the emphasis here is that we've got some trained models for kind of fairly obvious candidates out here, but invariably you are going to have a form which is specific to your business. And you can go and train it, and we're going to go through some of those services. And as you'd expect, we've got a REST API, so you can call that pretty much from any language you want to go and do it from. But we also have SDKs for Java, for JSON, so JavaScript, for Python, and for C#. Now, on that note, we talked about this, I know, Vinod, which was connectors.
Yeah.
You want to talk a bit about the connectors?
Yeah, so we, in addition to obviously using the REST API and the SDK, we also have connectors for a variety of different Azure services, as well as some non-Azure services, right? So Logic Apps is a common sort of process orchestration workflow that most customers like to use. And there is a form recognizer connector for Logic Apps where you can essentially configure the form recognizer connector, work with Logic Apps, and essentially process a document and then write the output to anything that Logic Apps supports you to write the output down to, right? So whether that be Cosmos DB, SQL, whatever you want to write this output to.
Right.
And there's also connectors for Synapse. We have a great partnership with the AI Builder team, where if you're an Office user and want to use Form Recognizer with Office, AI Builder has a great experience for you to get started building out a Form Recognizer workflow just within the Power Platform.
Cool. Yeah, the thing I love about things like Logic App is it gets so easy to stitch together a solution without requiring a lot of code. And you can do all the way through things like you can orchestrate these processes into email or into Microsoft Teams, or do a whole range of really interesting things and be able to automate those processes. Okay, so in terms of getting started with Form Recognizer, there are a couple of things you're going to need. Now, you're going to need an Azure subscription. Now, if you don't have one, you can sign up for free, and there's a free, I can't remember exactly, I think it's about a year service, and you get a certain amount of dollars per month. If you're a student and you're looking at this, there's also a student option to sign up on Azure as well, and you don't need a credit card. So those are kind of things. And then basically what you're going to be doing as part of this process is going to create an instance of the Form Recognizer service.
Yeah, and Dave, one thing to call out here is
yeah.
Form Recognizer also has a free tier. So even if you run out of those credits, you can still use Form Recognizer to try things out for yourself without actually having to pay for anything. So we do support that too.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I remember that. And the other thing is, if you're dealing with this and you start, one of the challenges can be with dealing with keys. And this is something quite new as well, is that for each cognitive service, you typically had to have a key for each service. But now there's this kind of the idea of a master key there. So that makes it much easier to kind of deal with multiple services you might be using as part of your overall solution. Maybe even you could just talk a bit about the file input types and the kinds of things that you can throw at Form Recognizer.
Yeah, we support we support a number of different image formats, like the things that you mentioned with PDFs, JPEGs, and things like that. But we also support PDF documents. Is primarily the majority of what most of our customers bring to us is PDF documents. But like you mentioned, we also support a number of different image formats as well, and we're continuing to expand the types of documents we're supporting. We're probably going to be starting to support some of the Office type documents as well.
Okay, great. And actually, there goes some information there on the free and the paid tiers as well.
Yeah.
Just to really kind of emphasize, you can get up and running with this very cost effectively and actually have a bit of a play around with it. So some really neat things to do. So you need to kind of decide what components you're going to use. So there's kind of the broader category of what we call document analysis. And we've got layout models, we've got read models, we've got general document models, and that will become more apparent when we kind of go into the demo. As we mentioned before, we've also got pre-built models. So for things like W2 forms, receipts, IDs, etc. And we can also create industry specific or custom forms. Now, I'm just going to go through this super quickly because we're going to delve into this, but just to kind of give you a sense of, I'm just going to scroll through this, but these are kind of some of the pre-built films, and they've got the kinds of things that you'd expect to be able to extract off these forms. So we've got W2 forms on there, we've got invoices, we've got things like invoice dates, billing addresses, and stuff like that. Receipts, we've got merchant name, tax, tip, totals, for documents and business cards, etc. So those are the types of data that you can actually extract out of your forms and get into and flow that information into your overall business processes. So right, we're going to next thing we're going to talk about is actually, I think what we're going to do, sorry about this, is we are going to have a demo. I think we're
Yeah,
going to do the
I think
yes.
I think so.
We're
I think
going
we should do a quick demo with describing how you could use some of these capabilities we just talked about. So, Flo, if you don't mind, why don't we switch over to my screen and then we'll talk through some of these things, right? So the other thing you'll notice is this is the Form Recognizer Studio that I have on the screen. We probably jumped around a little bit from the original flow. I think Form Recognizer Studio was probably like module 7. We decided to move this up a little bit because it just makes sense for us to talk about all the things that Form Recognizer can do in the context of the studio. So, so as we go through this, you might find that we're a little bit out of sequence, but just bear with us because it makes sense. So the first thing I'll say as we go through the Form Recognizer Studio is if you're familiar with Form Recognizer and you've used anything in the past, you've probably used the sample labeling tool. The Form Recognizer Studio is the newer experience of essentially everything that you can do with all of Form Recognizer capabilities. To get started, it's super simple. All you do is click on this little settings cog at the top right and configure it to use your Azure AD as well as a particular Form Recognizer resource that you've created in the Azure portal. Once you do that, you're off and running, and you can play around with the rest of the capabilities just within the studio. So as Dave was talking about all of the different capabilities, he talked about layout, he talked about some of the pre-built models like invoices, receipts, and business cards. Let's do a quick demo of looking at each of these things in action in the studio, because a demo speaks way better than us looking at JSON. JSON was not meant for humans to look at, and it was machine readable, right? So let's leave it at that. So let's start with the layout API, right? And the layout API, I'll click on layout and you'll notice that I have a few sample documents that I can try. If I wanted to, I could bring in a document that I have locally as well to try it out. But in this case, I'm just going to start with using one of the existing sample documents. So I'm going to click Analyze, and you'll see I get the analyzed results right away. The first thing you'll notice is there's a little bit of a yellow hue on some of these words, and that's essentially the result of the OCR engine sort of recognizing those as words, and it's just a little bit of a hint for us to know that there's text over there that's been recognized by the OCR engine. You'll see that I can extract all of the text that's being returned as part of the document. But you'll also see that there's a few additional things that you can get, right? In addition to all of the text, layout also is able to extract structure that is inherent in every document. And the first things you'll notice is I have a few toggles over here that I can turn on and off. So there's text, there's tables, which is essentially structure that we can say that there's 2 separate tables in here. So if I look at any of these tables, you can see that there's a table that's been extracted with 5 different rows, 5 different columns and 2 different rows. This is essentially a unsupervised table extraction. I didn't have to do anything. It's just able to recognize that there's a table or there's 2 tables in this particular document. Where do they start and end? What are the values contained within each of the cells? And that's just obvious based on the structure of the document. Similarly, I can extract selection marks, and it can tell me that there's 2 selection marks here, and it can tell me what the state of each of those selection marks is. So layout is going to continue to improve, and it will also include additional elements of structure from within the document, and that'll be things like section headers, section bodies, and things like that. So there's a tremendous amount of work going into layout to make it sort of more useful as you think about ways that you might want to decompose a document and use specific parts of a document in a further sort of downstream analysis model or something like that. So that's essentially the layout API. Let's go look at a general document API next, right? And general document API, similarly, there's again, with each of the APIs, you get the standard ability to analyze the default document or pick a different document that you want to analyze, right? So you can bring in a document for yourself. General document API takes things one step further from the layout, and it's essentially extracts all the things that layout extracted. So you get this is one thing that I wanted to call out, because a lot of people don't really recognize this, is that as you go up the stack in Form Recognizer, you still get all the components of the underlying models from below as well. So the output that layout generates is actually part of the output of the general document model as well. In addition to that, the general document model also extracts key value pairs, right? So not only can I tell you that there's some tables on this document, but I can also tell you that there are selection marks in this case. There's a field that is called new well, and it is selected. So now that there's checkboxes, and the state of those checkboxes, and what are the keys associated with those checkboxes as well. So you not only get the state that there's a checkbox and it's selected, but what the actual key is that's associated with this. So now you can use that in your downstream processing. Similarly, you get all the other key value pairs as well from each of these documents. So you can see in this case, there's a key that is saying it's the lease number, and the value is whatever that string is with the numbers contained within, right? So as you look at these capabilities from the general document API, you can throw any document at it, right? And it'll try to extract all the key value pairs that it can, but it'll still give you all the underlying structure information as well.
Nice quick question. Where
Yeah.
did those documents come from? So you've got documents already in there. So, and how would I go about adding my own documents?
Yeah, so essentially all you have to do is, so these documents are just documents that we've sourced as an example to say, like how do you get started with using the studio, right? So we didn't want to add the additional burden for somebody to have to go bring in their documents as well and test it out. So we just wanted to give people a quick and easy way to just get started, try things out. Obviously, if I have a document for myself, I can go in here and click the add button, and now I can go find the document that I really want, bring that in, and analyze that. So that's an option that I can use as well. Great question, Dave. So typically, we'd expect that most customers want to do that, because obviously, running through the samples is fun and good, but they really wanted to see if it can work with the documents that they're typically working with, right? And so that's the assumption there. Right. So we looked at layout, we looked at general document. Let's look at the invoice model next, right? So this is a pre-built model. We're now sort of going from where we were in the world where we were dealing with documenting or document type agnostic models to now going into a model that is tuned to a specific type of document. So with the invoice model, as Dave was scrolling through that list, you saw that there's a list of fields that are being extracted. So I can go ahead and do the same thing here. I can click and just accept a sample document and analyze that, or I could actually bring in an invoice that I want to work with. And you'll notice that the first thing that you get out of the invoice model is something similar to what you got with the key value pairs model. But in this case, those keys are really, really specific to an invoice. So the couple of things that I'll call out here is, for example, let's look at the bill to address, right? So in this particular invoice, the key here is bill to, but if you look at the actual output that's being generated, the key that is used is billing address recipient, right? And the reason we do this is we want to make sure that we're giving you a well-defined schema that you're mapping to. So irrespective of the 50 or 100 different suppliers that you're getting invoices from and what they call their fields in each of these invoices that they submit to you, you always know that you're going to get a field back that's going to say billing address recipient, irrespective of whether they call it bill to or like whatever the key name is that they use in that particular reference. And that's the core value of the invoice model. So in addition to obviously all of the details that you get from all the different fields that are like invoice number and customer name, you also get the invoice line item details, right? And this is the details of each of the different line items that were part of the invoice. And finally, there's the bottom half of the invoice, which is typically your sum, tax, total, and things like that.
Actually, Vinod, can I just interrupt you, because there's actually a pretty cool question that's come through, and it's one that I personally hadn't thought about, but I'm sure you have. Barcodes. What's the story with barcodes, and do we support them, and can you scan those in and deal with those?
Yeah, barcodes is actually a good question. We are continuing to look at barcodes as a feature that we add to our document analysis models. It isn't part of the models yet. We're working on sort of defining what that feature might look like and how we source the right data to be able to do this. So it is something that I'd say is a roadmap item for us right now. It's not something that we actually support as of today.
Okay, cool.
Great. So yeah, keep the questions coming. If there's anything that you see in the chat that we need to bring up, like I probably haven't been paying attention to the chat, but
yeah, actually, there is a question that's just popped up now, which is around collaboration. Can I have multiple people working on this inside Form Studio?
Yeah, so essentially Form Studio, if you think about the documents that we just looked at, all of the pre-builds and all general document, you don't really need to do any collaboration on these because those are just essentially APIs that you're calling. You get it in a document, you get a response back. So there's no collaboration needed. The collaboration aspect of it comes in when you're dealing with custom models, right? When you're dealing with a training data set and you want multiple people in there sort of labeling documents and so forth. And in order to do that, essentially, if you point it at the exact same training data set, multiple people can then use that same training data set to either train the model or label the documents. So if you've got a training data set that has, like, say, 50 documents, and you just say, like, hey, the two of us, let's just spend an hour, label these 50 documents and get going. All we'd have to do is point each of our studio environments to that particular training data set, and then we can both start labeling those documents together and make sure that we get the work done in the next hour.
Okay.
Great questions. I mean, yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about the custom part as we go along. But in terms of pre-built models, I think that the key message is it's a defined schema, it's a defined taxonomy, and you don't have to deal with a lot of those variations in keys. But it also extracts all the fields that you want. One final call out that I'll make as we talk about the invoice model is in different locales. For example, like, customers in India have always complained that they need a field called VAT because that's a really important field that they need to extract. If that particular field is not something that the invoice model extracts today, we are actually in the process of updating the invoice model to include the output for the general key VP or general key value pairs model, which is what we just looked at, the general document model. And you will now get the output from both the general document model as well as the invoice model in a single call to the invoice model at no additional cost, right? So it'll extract all the keys that the invoice model typically extracts, but it'll also find all the keys that are present within the document that the general document model can extract, and you can then use those outputs as well, or you can use the union of those two things to now perform whatever downstream sort of analysis or processing you need. Procurement is a fairly complex scenario, and so there may be certain things that you're looking for that may not necessarily always be part of the invoice application, invoice data model, and this essentially allows you to light up those scenarios as well.
Okay, cool.
So we talked a little bit about the sort of like document agnostic models. We talked a little bit about some pre-built models. We can go look at more pre-built models as well. But I think you get the idea of like how these things work, right? It's a simple request. You send in with a document, you get a response back. The next thing we can talk about is custom models. But Dave, before we talk about custom models, I think we need to do some setting of the stage to talk about what custom models are and how you want to do this. So maybe do you want to lead us?
Yeah. So Flo, if you could flip back to my screen, that'd be fantastic. Model. Yep. Okay. So thanks for that. So so we talked about we've got some pre-built models, but invariably you want to go and build your own models based on your own business requirements. Now, I just want to talk about some of the assets, and in fact, I might talk a bit about the question that was put in there as well. So behind the covers, or what's happening with these forms as you go and analyze these forms and take them through the process, there are certain assets that are going to be built. So obviously you've got the PDF documents or the JPEG files or bitmap files that you're going to scan. But what we're doing behind the scenes is we're building out, I kind of call it metadata files. So we've got the OCR JSON file, we've got labels JSON file, and we've got fields. Now the OCR file, the OCR JSON file, that basically contains a list of pretty much all of the elements on the document. So the key value pairs, selections, tables, all those types of things, and it's defining the location of those items within a document. And then we have these things called labels. Now, Vinod talked about these labels. He made a comment about that you can have a high level version of, I'm going to refer to it as invoice number, no matter what, how it's typed up on various vendors' documents. I'm always going to assume that it's going to be called invoice number. And when I come to pushing that through my business process, I know I've got a standard name to go by. And then the fields JSON document is type information. That's the kind of the way I think about it. Is this a string? Is it an integer? Is it a date? Those are the types of things that are held in field documents. And I'm going to show you kind of how those things get built in a moment. So we'll just go through this process, and you can go and build them using REST APIs. So you can go and create these, train these models up using REST APIs, or you can go and use Form Recognizer Studio. Now, I'm actually going to go and use Form Recognizer Studio. And I think we'll just go through here. So we talked about, I just want to touch on this really quickly. So REST APIs, you can go and call upon the document analyze services, and you'll get back what we call results. So we've got read results, which contains all of the recognized text in a document. We've got document results, and those contain back that are kind of forms specific types of things like key value pairs, first name, company name, etc. And then depending on if you've got tables in your documents, we also return back page results. And as Vinod mentioned before, we're not going to dwell too much on JSON. That's really, we're just going to push this into a system. But you can see there go the read results. And we also get back things like confidence data. And again, confidence around that data is kind of important. Now, the general rule of thumb is really depends on the type of data that you're working with. So if it's fairly generalized data, then we look at things like a confidence of around about 80%. 80% and better is generally okay for kind of general purpose documents. But if there are documents that you really care about, so for example, the obvious one to me would be medical records. You want to make sure that that's got a really high degree of confidence, and you can get at that data through this. So, and again, the SDKs also expose that through that information here. And then we've got document results, and we've got the type, and you can see it's a string values and Apple and things like that. So that's one of the things just to keep in mind. In fact, there's a bit of a discussion down here about the kinds of rules of thumb you should think about for confidence levels. And as I said, if it's data that you really care about, then you obviously want to make sure that you've got a high degree of confidence on that. Okay, so the next thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a demo. Now, the code here is, I've got a slightly modified version of the code that you can go and use. So what you can do is you can go and launch a virtual machine, and inside that virtual machine, we've got everything set up for you, and you just go and install various bits, and you can install data, and you can start playing around with Form Recognizer. Now, what I've actually done, and it's super easy to do this as well, is I actually installed the bits on my own local machine. But it really comes up down to you. So you need to have an Azure subscription. Free one's just fine. And as Vinod mentioned a couple of times, you can also use the free tier of Form Recognizer to get up and running. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're just going to go into a very quick demo. And I've got Form Recognizer Studio loaded up here as well. And I'm going to go into custom model. And you can see that I've already got a project, and you'll see there's a bit of discussion around here around the types of models and templates you can use, and you'll see this in a moment. But we have kind of two ways in which you can train things. One, we have template models, and the other one is for neural network, or you can use a neural model. Now, template models are good, they're fast, and we support a lot of languages for them. So I think in the order of 100, over 100 languages. I think I heard you say 160 languages,
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
kind of order. Neural models, potentially you can deal with more complex documents, but they are English, and I think you mentioned Spanish. Is that correct?
They do work fairly well for Latin-based languages like Spanish and German and French and a few other languages. But primarily, the data set that it's been trained on right now is primarily English-based documents.
Okay, cool. So those are just something to keep in mind. So I've got down here a model that I've already built, a project that I've already built. And you can see in here that this is a case where I've got a custom form, and you're going to see where these have come from. Now, to be 100% clear, what is going on here is I have uploaded some documents into Azure Storage. And you'll see that I've got form 1, form 2 JPEG, form 3. And you'll also see in here that I've got labels.json and OCR. So remember, OCR kind of had the total structure of that document, and the labels was really mapping that data to the high level variables that we're going to use downstream in our business processes. So that's where the data lives in Azure Storage, in blob storage. Okay, so that's where these documents have been fed from, and I basically told this project to go and look in that location. And you'll see through this here that I've got some labeled data. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll down a little bit, and you'll see that I've got a form down here, which is form 6. Now, you remember in my storage, what I showed you before, I've got form 6 JPEG, but I've got no label and I've got no OCR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the form, and what it's going to do is going to go away and analyze that document. And it's going to bring that back. So you can see now what it's done. It's a new document of this basic set of custom forms that I'm going to be using. And you can see it's highlighted each of these forms. I can now go and select. So for example, dated as, I could go and search for dated as, and this is what I want to know it as. And you can see over on the right-hand side, I can click on that, and I can go and do things like subtypes. And I can say, hey, look, this is just going to be a string, or it's a date, or it's a time, or things like that. So that's the kind of the overall process about how you go and bring these documents in, and then you effectively start training them and defining and labeling them. So what I've done is I've already been through that process already. So I go and look at the first form, and again, the exercise that you can go through, I will take you through this process. The way that I've extended this is I added in over and above the form that is the exercise, is I've added in a table. And basically what I went through is said, okay, this is a table in my form. And then what I've done is I've told the model that these are going to be items in this table. And it's literally, I dragged and dropped them. And then ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on train. And then what I can do down here is I can select the type of model. Am I going to do a neural based model, which is going to take longer, and again, potentially useful for less structured documents? Or am I going to use a multilingual, faster model? And again, it just comes down to experimenting with that. But that is a process. I'm not going to kick this off because it takes in the order of, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes to go off and do that process. And it'll go off and build that model. So what I've got here is, you can see I was playing around with this, and I've got a number of models. And the model I'm actually going to be using is this one called Build 22 Demo. And what I can do, so this is a model that I pre-trained up today. You can see it's got today's date in it. We're in the future here in Australia. And you can see that the confidence we're coming, I can go and test this model. And what I
Hey,
can do
Dave,
is I can go, yo,
one quick, sorry to interrupt, but there's a
that's
question in
okay.
the chat about that I thought might be good to talk about it at this point, which is there things that it can reliably recognize in the studio, and can it alert you if these beyond confidence values? The question, I guess, is can the studio alert you as you're training a document and tell you if the key value pairs that you've labeled are not going to get recognized right? And if you don't mind, actually go back to pick the model that you were working with
Yep.
and click the details on that. And what you'll see here is that there's actually a accuracy score that's being generated as part of that model training process as well. So to answer the question that was posted in the chat, the accuracy scores are what you look at to identify if your model has sufficient confidence that it can recognize the key value pairs of the tables that you label accurately across the training data set that you have, right? So anytime you see an accuracy that's probably in the 40 or 30%, you know that there's something weird going on. Either maybe mislabeled something, or maybe you might have even template variations that the model is not quite comfortable with, and you need more training data. So those will always signals to you to say, like, there's something that you're running into that you might want to go check or redo as you go through this.
Cool. Good question. Thank you.
So sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but the question was sort of relevant to what you were talking about then, so I just wanted to make sure.
100%. Thank you. And what I can do now is I can go and test this, and you can see this is a form, and what I can go and do is analyze this, and what it will do is it will come back and say, okay, so this is my test documents, I've done my training, you need to have a minimum of 5 forms that you've gone basically and marked up and labeled. And then you go through and test it, say, well, how well does my form perform? And you can see down through here, you've got these confidence levels again, these accuracy levels down here. So that's the kind of the idea behind that. So you can go and test it. So what I love about Form Recognizer Studio, it gives you a very iterative way in which you can go through and kind of test your models as you're going and see, have you got something working well enough? When I go back to the models and okay. So what I want to do now is I've shown you how to do this inside Form Recognizer Studio, but of course, invariably what we want to be able to do is to kind of integrate this into our overall business process. And what I've got, and you'll see that this is the example inside the exercise that you can go through, is I've got the Python application, a Python application. And what I've got here is I've got a form that I'm going to upload and basically run this form against this trained model. And we'll go across to the Python model. Now, actually, there's something I just want to draw your attention to here. You'll notice that when you're training models, there are a version 2 and a version 3 of the APIs. You'll find that when you go through the exercise, you're actually going to generate version 2 metadata. So for the OCR, JSON documents and labels and things like that. So you do need to be aware of that. But there's also information about how do you migrate that through into version 3. So I'm using version 3 APIs, and I'm using the Python script that is for version 3. And I put this script up on my GitHub, and I'll have a link to that at the end. Okay, so what I'm going to do, you'll see that I'm just going to fire up this Python script. So F5. And you'll see that the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the model ID. You'll see that I've got the form key and the endpoint as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of this thing called Document Analysis Client. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my test document. So remember, the test document is this document over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload that into the service, and we're going to basically score it against those trained models, and we're going to get back the results. So we'll wait for the results, and we will then display the results. And you'll see what I've done now is I've brought back a table, and this is just the way I've happened to format it. But you can see now what I've got is I've got the key value pairs, plus I've got the confidence data. So now I can obviously take that. Now, obviously, I'm just displaying this, but really what I would be doing is I'd be passing this information into another part of my business process. So you can see in here, so I've got things like company name, and if I go look over here, it's Yoga for You. And I'm sure if I have a dig around in here, we've got company name over here, Yoga for You. And you can see dated as 4th of the 4th, and you can see we've got dated as 4th of the 4th. And we'll step through this code. In fact, I'm just going to run this. And what that's done is it's now iterated through the tables. So it found that in the data that I got back from Form Recognizer, you can see I got 2 tables back. Now, just to show you where those tables were, you remember we've got the purchase order details, and we've got another table down here which has got the totals and the tax in here. So again, you can see we've got inside this table, we've got long yoga mat. We've also got a short yoga man, which wasn't entirely sure what that was. And we've got a towel wide and things like that. And if we scroll down a bit further, and you'll see that we've now got the key value pairs for subtotal, and you'll see we've got the values out of that form. So as I said, this is the bit that's kind of magical, because you can take your custom forms, train up these models, and then pass in examples of your forms as they come in, as real forms come into your business processes, score them against that, get back the data, and then feed that data back into your business process, into the next step. And again, it could be things like Logic App for taking low code and no code options. Okay, great. So that was pretty much the demo. So hopefully it kind of gives you a bit of a sense. Sorry, you're going to say something, Vinod?
Yeah, Dave, I think there's a couple of questions. And I actually did have one more thing that I wanted to probably bring up, because I think this is a common gotcha that most people run into. So actually, Flo, if you don't mind, do you mind just swapping over to my screen for a second here? We'll just talk about this. So the question on the chat that we probably need to answer is, regarding invoices, what makes you choose to create a new model and probably create a composed one for it? So I guess reading the question, I can tell that this is somebody who's actually used Form Recognizer before, because they asked about something that we haven't talked about yet, which is composed models, right? And so this is a great question. So let's just spend a minute talking about it. With Form Recognizer, you can have a model per template, right? So if you think about it, as you build a custom model, a template model essentially works well with a well-defined visual template. And so if you have like invoices coming from different vendors, each of them uses a different template, you need to create a model per invoice template, and then you can compose these things together into a single model. So what you do when you compose these models together is you're creating a single logical model that is a combination of all of these different templates that you're dealing with. And when you analyze a particular document, that document is sent into the service. It then compares that against each of the different template types that it knows about, and then it picks the right model to analyze that document with, and then returns the results back to you. In addition to the results, it also includes a document type property with a confidence score associated with that to say, I picked this particular template to analyze this particular document, and my confidence in making that choice was about 90%. That's an example of how the service returns this document back to you. So composed models is a great way to deal with variations. But as you're dealing with this, and you want to maybe you look at the neural models don't have that same limitation of variations. You can essentially add as many training documents or samples as you have, irrespective of what type they are or what are the variations contained within. And the model will learn about those variations, and you have a single neural model that can deal with both the structured documents that you're dealing with as well as unstructured documents that you have. And it can understand that these variations exist within these documents, right? So just make sure that they're all obviously the same fields. They're all the same, like they all have to be invoices as an example. They all have to be contracts as an example. But if there's different variations within those are handled by the neural document model without needing to create multiple different models and then composing them together.
Okay, that's great. So there was another really good question that came up actually, particularly in Europe, having to deal with different types. So, for example, in the UK, if you had a value type, you'd put a decimal point to specify the pence. In France, you would use a comma. For decimal points? So how would you are the models able to be able to deal with, are they culturally aware in terms of different types?
Currently, that's a great question, right? So I think right now it is essentially what we're extracting, and that would be a post-processing step to extract that and ensure that it's extracted in the right locale uh, based on what you're trying to extract the value to. But that's also something that we continue to work on to ensure that we can extract the content in the right locale.
Okay, great.
Um,
Thank you, Nick. That was a good question.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. One thing I did want to call out, and I think this is something that I see a lot of our customers running into, is as you look at the output. So one thing that I'll say is, again, as you look at the outputs from Form Recognizer, you get all the different components from the output. But there is one common challenge that most customers run into, right? So, and I'm using this particular example. This is a custom form with tables. You can see that there's some table information in here. The things that I see most customers running into is they don't recognize that there's two places that this information is contained within, right? So as you look at the output, the first output you're going to see is the first element within the output is the pages element. So this is essentially the output from OCR, and I'm just going to minimize this for now, right? The next thing you'll see is tables, right? And this table down here with 11 rows essentially represents this particular table. And this is the output of the layout API, or the completely unstructured, completely unsupervised training model, right? That essentially extracts layout information. That's what we looked at in the first demo when we started off, right? But since I've actually labeled this as a set of table fields, this output is also contained within the document section of the output, right? So if you look at the document section of the output, and I'm going to scroll over here a little bit, so, or maybe just bring this over. For some reason, I'm not able to do that. But if you look in here, these are the key value pairs that it's extracting, right? And if you look at each of these different key value pairs, you'll see that there's down here that there's going to be one that's going to be of type list or array, and that is the one that, oh, here you go, maintenance log, right? So the maintenance log is of type array. And this is the output of the supervised table extraction that we just talked about, right? So this is the data I labeled and said, this is the table that I'm looking for, and this is the extraction results that I got. So be aware that the tables will show up in two different places. You get the tables that are part of the unsupervised output, as well as the labeled tables, and they're going to be in two separate parts of the document results, and just make sure that you're picking the right one.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Now we're pretty much end of time. So Flo, can I get you to switch over to my screen? So really just as a quick summary, so hopefully you've figured out we had lots of demos in there. So we really talked about using form recognizers, layout services, pre-built models. You can go and build your own custom models. You can go and build composite models. We talked about the OCR capabilities in there. We talked about the REST APIs and the SDKs. So we've got those out there. And you remember it was also, of course, you almost invariably, you want to go and integrate this into your own business processes. And we've got things like Form Studio, which make it a really great experience to go and build out these models, label these models and things like that. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've also got the resources. So take a quick screenshot if you missed out before. So just grab, these are the resources for the session. Do check out the docs. There's a lot more detail in there about languages supported and things like that. The Learn module we've been through, we skipped a few things. We changed the order a bit just to kind of make it a bit more demo rich. Do check out the Learn module. Check out the Applied AI. And remember, I changed my code a little bit to use a version 3 APIs. So do check out my GitHub, and you'll find that Python code up there to go and deal with that. And then finally, this is a link off to the session, so off to MS Learn. So do check that out. There's videos up there, practice videos. There's Q&A, knowledge checks, which are actually pretty good. You go through them and you say, I didn't quite get that concept, and you can go back and revisit what's going on. So that's a general gist of what you can do. So from me, thank you so much for joining. We had a stack of questions that I know the moderators were dealing with, and thank you for Flo for pushing up some of those questions that were relevant to what we were talking about as well. So, and thank you, Vinod, for getting involved too. So,
yeah. Thank you, everyone. I think we had a great session. There was, I think, about over 200 people attending. So that's always great to see that there's interest in the topic, and hope you found this useful. So thank you again for your time and patience.
That's great. And you remember, it's online, will be available on demand. And so if there's bits that you don't get, just scroll back and go and check that out. And enjoy the rest of Build. I know it's going to be a great conference. So thank you very much for taking your time. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.